Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I am your host, per usual. Oh, well, sorry if I'm a little down today. I was reminded of the fragility of life this last week, and so not going to go into it more than that, but if I'm a little bit more dour than usual, well, I apologize, and hopefully next week will be better. As for this week, on the agenda, UFC and ESPN 44 was yesterday. That was a pretty good card, actually. We said, I think the only thing I did negative was like, yeah, there's these light heavyweight fights back to back, which is not usually a good idea. And the flyweights got no respect, uh, which I still object to. But on the whole, it was a pretty solid card on paper, actually, and it turned out to deliver for the most part. We'll go over that. UFC on ESPN 80 is this coming Saturday. That is headlined by Curtis Blades and Sergey, not Spivak. Um, Spivak's the Moldovan, I believe. Moldova/Ukrainian. Pavlovich, the big Russian dude. Pavlovich has stupidly long arms. He had like 84 inches of reach. It's freakishly long. Like I think he's second only behind John Jones at the moment. And John's reach is, ridiculous. So we'll be previewing that. The news of the week, and there's some news. There's some news to talk about. So yeah, we will get into any and all of that. If you would please interact with the product a little bit. Like, comment, subscribe if that's applicable. Star rating, written review if that's applicable. If you've done any and all of that, share. Be that someone you know in person or on your social media platform of choice. Let people know about the show. If you think they'll enjoy it, point them in my direction. Always happy to try and, entertain, educate, whatever it is I do. I've said this before, man, even if I'm just the voice that you put on and something about my tone or whatnot happens to be soothing to your child. And okay, here, 2 hours, somewhere along the line, they're going to fall asleep and I'll be done. And if I help your kid get to sleep, I will take it every time. So, that's what we got there. That's all the usual stuff out of the way, so let's get into this event, shall we? UFC on ESPN 44. Main event. Darn good main event. Max Holloway defeats Arnold Allen via unanimous decision, 48-47 and 2 49-46s. Okay, doing this live, I was 48-47 Allen, and before you come at me with your pitchforks, let me explain. One, I do not stand behind my scoring of the fourth round in particular. I got that one wrong doing it live. Mea culpa. That was a close round. Um, it should have gone to Max. My mistake. The fifth round, all the judges gave Allen the fifth round, and I'm not saying it's wrong. Again, I did it too. It's worth noting that he did get dropped right before the bell. Not like full on dropped, but we got at the very end of this. Allen, to Allen's eternal credit, like his corner told him between rounds 4 and 5, we need a finish, which he probably did. Bare minimum needed the round, as we know now, wouldn't have been enough. It wasn't even. He got the fifth, and again, I think across the board. And his response to his corner was, "So it's World War III," and yeah, F it, World War III. And he came out for that fifth round, dude. If you even make it to the fifth round, I shouldn't say this because a lot of guys have made it to the fifth against Max, but he knew, like, I'm down, I need a finish, and he came out and he was looking for it. He pushed things right away. He was landing not consistently all night, but he found Max's chin more than once. His left hand was landing at a decent-ish clip. Max's chin just remains uncracked. Like, Max has a couple of records I mean, some of which are just never going to be touched. He's landed more than 3,000 significant strikes over the course of his UFC run. He passed the 3,000 mark on this fight, actually. And the next closest is Frankie Edgar, I think, who has like 1,200. I mean, Max is far and away like the most active fighter once a fight starts. Like, I mean, some guys who have more power than him will just, turn your lights out, but he just doesn't stop. But his chin is still. This is one of the things I was curious about. I think I picked Max, but I'm curious about his chin because he's got a stat that's going the wrong direction, and that strikes absorbed. I brought this up last week when I talked about GSP, because GSP in his last couple of fights before the Bisping fight, he'd absorbed more strikes over the course of those 3 fights, which I think was Condit, Diaz, and then Hendricks, than the rest of his UFC career basically combined. He took a lot. That stat starts going in the wrong direction. It's not great. Max I believe he's absorbed more significant strikes than anyone in UFC history. I mean, he's just got a chin. He's never been dropped. Is the craziest thing about Max Holloway. He got close. Poirier almost dropped him, but didn't officially. Yeah, he's just otherworldly tough. And that's going to go at some point. It does for everybody. Nobody keeps that forever. And but to this point, Volkanovski hit him, especially their third fight. Volk hit him a lot. Yair Rodriguez hit him a fair bit. He just absorbed it, adjusted, put a decent enough beating on Yair in return, got some, his wrestling was kind of the difference maker there. But Allen cracked him several times. Holloway's head is just made of granite. I think it was Conor. I don't like quoting Conor McGregor here because he's so frequently just weird. But he said on Twitter, if you make it to the 5th round against Max Holloway, you should be allowed to use a bat. You can't. That guy just doesn't stop. Now, as mentioned, Holloway's got a pretty good attrition rate of beating guys, but he's got a lot of fights that have gone the distance too. Now he's pushing back and doing the, don't count me out thing, and fair play to you, man. He looked good here. Max's movement is very smooth. This was his first win against a dedicated southpaw in his UFC career. He was 0-3 against them before this. Now, granted, that's Conor in 2013. Was it 13 or 16? It would have been 16. And then the 2 fights with Poirier. So, he's losing to... Dude, nobody was beating Conor on that ascension. I think Max would have beat him if they'd rematched at any point. But at that point in time, Conor was just Conor. And then Poirier, both times they fought, Poirier's just a beast. But Allen being a dedicated southpaw, I was curious, why did he struggle with southpaws? Is it just because Conor at that point was, on the ascension and Poirier is just Poirier? I don't think it's quite that. I think at both of those periods of time, the Poirier fights are so far apart, there's very few lessons that you can take between them. But I think my general takeaway is that Holloway's finally gotten a little bit more comfortable with his kicking versus southpaws when he wasn't before. And for as much as Max's offense is, we primarily think of the volume of punches, and dude, I've said this before too, man. I defy you to keep Max Holloway's output up on just a heavy bag, to say nothing of, sparring or actually fighting. It's absurd. But a lot of his setups for that come from his kicks. It's a lesson that he kind of learned from Conor, actually, when they fought, because Conor, and I've said this about him too, Conor's boxing isn't great. His kickboxing, however, especially for MMA, is quite smooth. A lot of what he does, a lot of his setups for his punches come from his kicking game. And that's fine. It's MMA. You can do that. But fighting southpaws seem to have monkeyed with Max's kicking game for a long time. I don't know if it was just he wasn't all that comfortable kicking out of southpaw. He does other stuff from southpaw very well, but kicking out of southpaw, he wasn't quite great at it. I don't know if it was open stance kind of messes with his jab a little bit, especially again we're talking Poirier and McGregor in particular. Like you don't get to make too many mistakes against those guys. But he seems to have. I noticed this in particular because I was watching for it. His kicking game against Allen seemed a lot more in line with what he normally does against a traditional orthodox fighter. So that seemed to have, and that opens up a lot of his game. His counter game is always strong. His movement, this was noted by commentary, I'm going to echo it. If you want to take one thing away from Max Holloway's game, watch how he moves. He is among the very best, certainly in the world right now, if not ever in the sport, at sliding. And again, watch how he moves. The man floats. He glides more often than not. His head is pretty level, and he's just floating out there. And he moves just enough to get you to miss, and he is in position to counter. That's because there's a lot of his stuff that his game that it's really hard to replicate. I mean, I wouldn't advise fighting in a lot of the ways he does if your chin isn't like his, and very few people have his chin. Again, he's been in the UFC forever. He's absorbed more significant strikes than pretty much anyone else, and he's never been dropped. And he has fought some guys with serious oomph. Conor didn't drop him. Poirier didn't drop him. Volkanovski in 3 fights didn't drop him. Dude, Brian Ortega hit him pretty hard. And Ortega's got power. Ortega couldn't drop him. Freaking Jose Aldo couldn't drop him. Like, I don't know what his head is made of. And he's going to wind up paying the price for this, I'm fairly sure. But he doesn't get hurt very often. His volume is still a problem. And yeah, he seemed... I hesitate to say this because I'm not trying to poke the metaphorical bear here. I still think Holloway is probably on the downside. And let me be clear when I say this. Again, I'm not knocking the man. He's still good enough to beat a lot of that division. I mean, Arnold Allen was undefeated in the UFC. Holloway was a step up for him, but he's still good enough. If you're still good enough to beat a guy like Arnold Allen, like that says a lot about where you still are. He beat Yair Rodriguez not that long ago. Yair's now the interim champion, going to fight for the full belt. Like, he's still very, very good. When I say he's on the other side of it, this is a guy who's been in the UFC since he was 20. I mean, I did this last week. I'm going to do it again. But his UFC debut was 2012. He's been in the UFC, February of 12. He's been in the UFC for over 11 years. He's in his 12th year in the UFC. That's rare enough. It's rare enough to have that kind of a long run in the UFC. And he's had some fights, man, that have just been wars, some fights that just went long. I mean, if you look at some of his earlier fights even, the Poirier fight didn't go long, but he actually showed really good stuff in that fight. The Leonard Garcia fight was a little bit of a war. I mean, his big epic run, that he kind of beat up Clay Collard. The Cub Swanson fight was a little back and forth, more favoring Holloway all the way through, but there was a little back and forth. The Lamas fight, he didn't get hit nearly as much as Lamas did, but a little back and forth. Both the Aldo fights were. I thought not only did he finish Aldo both times, I actually the first fight between them, I had them around a piece going into the third. But Aldo won, I think, the first round in both fights officially. The Ortega fight, mostly that was him dealing, but not like he didn't get hit and hurt a few times either. That Poirier rematch, man, at UFC 236. I mean, what a great fight. But Poirier put it on him. I don't think it's a mistake or an accident that in the wake of that, Volkanovski was able to capitalize. Now, some of that is, Volk is the man, but it's that fight was, that's the kind of loss that winds up sticking with you in some respects, even just physically. Then you had the fights with Volk, the Cater fight. I mean, that was mostly him dealing again to a historic level. The Rodriguez fight was a lot like that. There's a reason that fight made a lot of us kind of go, whoa. Not just Yair is, a lot better than a lot of us were giving him credit for, but Max, the best version of Max against even that version of Yair, it's not that close a fight. Then the third fight between Max and Volk was, that was pretty easily the most definitive of their trilogy, right? So I still think he's probably, a step back, all things considered. The relevant data here is that Max Holloway, even having lost a step from his best, is still one among the very best in the world. He's in a weird spot with the title. I mean, I don't have a lot of appetite for a fourth fight between Holloway and Volkanovski. I loved their trilogy, I really did, but I'm also me. And I don't know that I need another one of those. So if Yair beats Volkanovski, which is not my prediction, but it's also not at all outside the realm of possibility, Holloway and Yair in a rematch. Very real possibility for him. He might also make a permanent move up to 155. That cut to featherweight is not the easiest thing in the world for him. I mean, he's never missed weight. But if you've ever seen him, especially if you've seen him outside of, fight week, he would. What we learned from the Poirier fight was he'd have to make a concerted effort. He'd have to bulk up a little bit and dedicate himself to leaving featherweight behind. But he hung in there with Poirier, man. That ain't easy. Poirier's one of the best in the world. So that's a thought. I mean, after the fight, Max Holloway said, I would like to fight the Korean Zombie in Australia. Chan Sung Jung has mentioned he would like to fight Max as well. Here's my thing about that. That's not a competitive fight at this point. And to all the Zombie fans out there, I'm sorry. I have immense respect for Chan Sung Jung. I have some very fond memories of his fights as well. But where he is now, I don't think that's a competitive fight. They might still make it, and if it's actually Jung's retirement fight, he's like, I'm going out after this. Last one. I've fought Volkanovski. I want to fight Max. I mean, he's fought Aldo and Volkanovski. If he wants to fight Max and say, I fought with the three best featherweights of all time, and those are the three best featherweights of all time, I can respect it. Let's not have any delusions here about how that fight goes. Where Zombie is now, not competitive. If both guys want it and both guys seem to, and we all kind of know the score going in, I can. That's one of those things. I can kind of grit my teeth and bear it, but not competitive. Not a competitive fight. Allen, I don't think his stock took a big hit here. He stepped up to one of the very best in the world, and he lost, but he did not look out of place at all. At all. This wasn't quite as close as it wasn't as physically demanding as the Yair fight was, but he more than proved himself to be worthy of fighting with the very best. So get him back in there, probably against another top-ish guy. If Max wants a competitive fight next instead of Zombie, he would probably have to fight the winner of Josh Emmett and Ilia Topuria. which, I mean, how could anyone object to that? Allen might get the loser of that fight, or again, if if Holloway gets the zombie, maybe you could do Allen against it'd be tough to do him against the winner of Topuria and Emmett. I think especially if it's Topuria. If Topuria wins and Volkanovski wins, they might have to do Topuria and Volkanovski, but Allen should be right in there with, those guys at the very top. He acquitted himself very well here. So that was your main event. Darn good fight. This was not your fight of the night. I understand why. It's the one that I think I'm going to list as my year-end discussion of maybe best fights of the year, but your actual fight of the night I thought was perfectly fine. So that was your main event. Co-main event. Ooh, buddy. Old Edson Barboza here. I may have counted him out a little bit too early here. He knocks out Billy Quarantillo with a beautiful knee strike. 2:37 of the first. These two got after it. Barboza, had some good leg kicks like he always does. Quarantillo's pressure was working. He was landing punches. He was getting Barboza to the fence and making him uncomfortable. Unfortunately, Quarantillo got a little bit predictable. He backs Barboza up. He's starting orthodox. He throws a right front kick, lands forward, so a step-through kick, if you will. Follows that up with a right hand, same side offense. You love to see it. Both of which land, by the way. But he uses that to try and set up a takedown attempt. So kick, land forward, punch, drop, looking for the double leg. And as he goes down, he's now southpaw. Rear leg of Barboza, even though he's kind of on the fence, is open. Straight lane up, knee to the face. Quarantillo drops. We're done. Heck of a knockout from Barboza. I still think he's still kind of past it. The book on him is pretty well written. That doesn't mean anybody and their dog could go out there and beat him. Incidentally, for those of you who might be interested in some of the mechanics here, if you look at, historically speaking, Khabib and the people that came out of Abdulmanap's camp, they almost never went for takedowns like this. They would almost always. I'm sure we can find instances of Khabib doing it in this similar position, but I mean, he fought Barboza, and but if you look at, there's an important difference here. Quarantillo, when he drops, he's either looking to just wrap for a double leg against the fence, or he's kind of reaching. So I think he's going for the double leg. So if he was going for the single leg, he wouldn't have had to reach the way he did. But his head's in the middle. And in straight wrestling, you usually kind of want that. It gives you some greater leverage and some greater force on your drive and whatnot. There's a variety of reasons. And I'm sure there's other wrestling coaches out there that teach the value of head outside. I'm not saying there's not value there. Again, this is one of those debates that's ultimately, you ask a dozen coaches, you're going to get a dozen answers. And what you wind up having to do is tailor your offense to how you wrestle best and how your opponent defends worse. But Abdulmanap had a philosophy about this. And this is why you see a lot of his guys shoot the way they do. He was always a proponent of head outside. This is MMA, essentially MMA specific. And he always said, go head outside because you can't get kneed in the face. You do open up guillotine attacks, but again, the philosophy here is, I can fight off a guillotine, I can't necessarily fight off getting knocked out. If I get kneed in the head going down, I'm going to go down. So you can see some of his logic play out here. If what Quarantillo does instead of reaching the way he does, if he goes head outside, this would be to his own right, grabs at a single leg instead of reaching for the double like that, that knee, it might hit him in the body, and that still wouldn't be fun, mind you. But he's conscious, and he's still fighting. So Little bit of, and again, man, if you know you're fighting someone with a real wicked guillotine who doesn't have great knee strikes, okay, we reverse this, obviously. But I mean, Teddy Atlas had the observation, in boxing, this is what the uppercut does. If someone's too aggressive, too consistently coming forward, you walk them into uppercuts because it disciplines them and makes them stay back or it finishes them. MMA fighters use elbows and knees to the same effect. And he's right. So, good win for Barboza. Again, I still think he's past it. I still am not sure. He said he wants to fight someone ranked above him this time. Fair enough. I mean, he's still at featherweight. I still think a lot of those fights don't go well for him, but he's still very dangerous. He's still very capable, and the dude's been in the UFC for a long time doing some really spectacular stuff along the way. I mean, I saw somebody mention this, like the knockout that he landed here, beautiful knockout. Like this is the kind of thing that most fighters like this is like the highlight of their knockouts ever. Something like this. Like this is one of their all-timers. I'm not entirely sure this is even like the fifth best knockout Edson Barboza has. It might be. Like you could certainly make the argument, but his knockout of Terry Adams better and flashier. His knockout of Beneil Dariush is actually a little bit flashier. You could argue one of his leg kicks. What was that body kick? He had that real gnarly body kick stoppage. Trying to remember which one it was. Where are you? The Evan Dunham. Dude, he folded Evan Dunham up like a lawn chair. Maybe even the Hooker fight. Okay, that was a pretty gnarly knockout. The Burgos one. The way he knocked out Shane Burgos, that was maybe more like that's kind of the point. Like the way he knocked out Billy Quarantillo, if you give that same knockout to most fighters, that's one of their best finishes ever. With old Barboza here, is it top five? Debatable. But it's not like that's not his best knockout. So sucks for Quarantillo, who was building some momentum, but sometimes you wind up taking a step up and it doesn't quite work out. I think this is the first time he's been knocked out cleanly. So I expect him to be back. Might have to take a slight step back in competition, but he's still young. He's still got some serious abilities. So, all right, light heavyweight. Azamat Murzakanov defeats Dustin Jacoby via unanimous decision, 20-20 across the boards. If Murzakanov can figure out his cardio, he's a real problem. He fights southpaw. He's got power in his left hand. He dropped Jacoby in the first. I think he dropped him twice in the second. One was more like an off-balance thing. One was just he clubbed him. He's got good setups for his punches. His problem is his cardio. He was visibly fatigued in the third. Uh, Again, if he figures that out, he's already a problem. Dude's undefeated. He's 13-0. He's got 2 wins in the UFC. He's good. If he sorts out that cardio and he gets a little bit, if he gets a more diverse offense, he's a little bit left-hand heavy at the moment. He actually cracked Jacoby with a really nice right hook at one point, but it was the only one he threw, I think. Some of the reason this went the distance is Jacoby's just hard-headed. I mean that in both the literal and the metaphorical sense. He ate some serious shots that would have put down a lot of other guys. So Murzakanov still has some stuff to work out, but if he sorts those things out, that dude's a problem for light heavyweight. Also at light heavyweight, Iwan Kutelaba defeated Tanner Bozier via TKO punches 205 of the first. Bozier He looked pretty good for light heavyweight. Here's kind of the problem with this. Um, there's kind of an assumption when people change weight classes, either, especially if you were too small for the one you were at and you cut down, or if you're sick of a big weight cut and you move up. I heard Rashad Evans talk about this. I think when he was on Morning Combat, either this week or last week. But he mentioned like it's okay to change weight classes, but you can't assume what you did before is going to continue working. There's differences. The other fighters are different. Your body's going to be different. There's just adjustments that have to be made. You have to kind of feel yourself and feel out the division. And I think that's a true observation in general. And I think Bozier came in here, and he's used to being the faster guy, and I don't think he was. Um, there's also there's some habits you get fighting heavyweights that aren't applicable to light heavyweights. And some of that was on display here. Kutalaba threw an overhand right that Bozier blocked. He went for the same setup, but instead of looping it overhand, he brought it straight, and you can see it. Bozier looks to raise his left hand. It's in guard position. He expects that punch to be a looping, and he raises the elbow up looking to block, and it leaves open the straight lane, and the straight lane is what Kutalaba takes. So I expect Bozier to kind of figure himself out at light heavyweight, but you're not going to most people are not going to instantly move between divisions and find tons of success, especially if you jump right into fighting relatively seasoned opponents. Like, it takes time to figure divisions out. So Kutalaba, he needed the win. He really needed it, and he got it, so good for him. Pretty good finish. Bantamweights. Pedro Munoz defeated Chris Gutierrez via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. Doing it live, I think I kind of leaned towards Gutierrez. Again, not one of those scoring decisions that I'm standing behind. But I give it to Munoz and just kind of look. The first round was all Munoz. He dropped Gutierrez with a pretty powerful left. Rounds 2 and 3 were close. They were very competitive. I don't object to Munoz winning here at all. Been a rough couple of weeks for the up-and-comers across some of these divisions, yeah? You had Allen here getting turned back, Gutierrez getting turned back. Who was it? Adrian Yanez last week went to step up at bantamweight, got turned back by Rob Font. Some of these old dogs, man, they're just not ready to give up their spot yet. And Gutierrez I still think very highly of him. Just a rough fight for him stylistically, and a learning experience ultimately. So hopefully he learns. Again, good win for Munoz. Was a good fight. This fight, the crowd started booing this one like in the second and third round, and commentary got after the crowd like, this is not a boring fight. It was not a boring fight. These two guys, I wonder if there was something else going on in the arena that was drawing some of the ire, because there was no reason to boo these two guys. Just none. And kicking off the main card, Rafa Garcia defeated Clay Guida via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Guida couldn't get a takedown, and if Guida can't get a takedown, Guida can't win. He got beat up and busted up on the feet. Garcia's jab gave him problems. Garcia landed some good uppercuts. Just a solid performance from Garcia, beating an old man. Guida's 42. Interesting note: Guida might have drawn the ire of certain people. See, after the fight, Daniel Cormier comes in. He interviews Garcia because he's the winner. Guida is seen visibly taking off his gloves, and we had a double retirement earlier in the night. I'll get to it in a second here. But Guida kind of looks like after this kind of performance, maybe it's time to hang him up. And this kind of induces the producers and Cormier to go over and go, sure, let's have a chat with Clay Guida. He might be retiring. And Guida then said, "Yeah, I tricked you by making you think I'm going to retire. No, I'm not going to retire." Uh, and then tried to do a post-fight speech, and Cormier had to take the mic away and just. And apparently Dana White and some of the other people were not terribly thrilled with that behavior. Like, if you're actually retiring, Guida's been with the UFC for a long time. In fact, he was, I believe, the second longest tenured behind Ed Herman, who we'll get to in a minute. He did retire. Both of them came into the UFC in '06. Herman came in, I want to say like June or July with that season, with the third season of The Ultimate Fighter concluding. Guida came in October of '06. And I was, on a personal note, if you've listened to me for a while, you'll know my sort of antipathy and enmity in some respects towards Clay Guida. I was really hoping he was going to retire, because then he could go away and I wouldn't have to watch Clay Guida fight anymore. Alas, not yet to be. Though if he really pissed off the wrong people, they might cut him. I mean, he's 42. He doesn't bring a whole lot of value anymore. They might just let him go. Which, again, I would find... It would make me happy, but the UFC doesn't do things that make me happy very often, so... Good win for Garcia. This shouldn't have been on the main card. The flyweight should have been on the main card. Dana acknowledged it after the fact. Like, a lot of us were saying this earlier, buddy. You shouldn't have your presumptive number one contender flyweight fight buried on the prelims, especially of a fight night. But the UFC hates flyweights, so what are you going to do? Anyway, that was the main card. As for the prelims, Bill Algeo defeated TJ Brown via rear naked choke, 140 of the second. This was your fight of the night. Deservedly so. These two got after it. They dropped each other. Brown, crazy fight. Crazy fight. This is worth your time to look up again, especially since it's only, 7-ish minutes. Good win for Algeo. Brown didn't look too bad here. They got after it. Good fight. Algeo, after the fact, faked retirement, cut a promo on the city. They were in Kansas City. Insulted the crowd. Pretty generic, cheap heat heel stuff, which, kind of worked. Got a bigger reaction when Daniel Cormier, walking out of the cage, said, "Kansas City, you better boo this man." And they kind of went, "Yeah, all right, we'll boo him." But Algeo, he's a good fighter. He's had some setbacks. He's had some setbacks in the UFC, but he's pretty good. Flyweight, I already mentioned it. This is your presumptive number one contender fight. Brandon Royval defeats Matthews Nicolau via knockout, knee and elbows, 2:09 of the first. Beautiful stuff from Nicolau here. From Royval. I mean, Nicolau didn't look bad, but they're both standing orthodox. Nicolau had done the same combination a bit too often. Dips down, fires a jab, and Royval intercepts him with a knee. Really nice knee. Follows up with the right hand, again, same side offense. Boom, boom. Gets on top, elbows him down. Royval's only losses in the UFC are to Alexandre Pantoja and Brandon Moreno. The two men about to fight for the title, as Moreno is the champion. The fight with Moreno actually was, you may recall this, they were having a darn good fight, actually, and then Royval's shoulder popped out near the end of the first round, and it rendered him unable to continue. So, unfortunate, because they were having, it was only a one-round fight, but they were having a good fight. I'm down for him fighting the winner. I'm okay with him getting the next title shot. Davis and Figueiredo initially mentioned after he lost to Moreno that he was going to move up to bantamweight. He seems to have postponed that and said, I got a couple of more fights at flyweight. They're working on him versus Manel Kopp. Heck of a fight, for the record. That's a heck of a fight. But with this win, I'd be okay with Royval getting the next shot. He's good. He's got history with both men. It's going to be a good fight one way or the other. Yeah, good fight here. At light heavyweight, Zach Cummings defeated Ed Herman via TKO punches, 4:13 of the third. Decent little fight here. Herman's defense has never been great. Cummings just kept hitting him with left hands. Eventually he hurt him, broke his nose, got him against the fence, and just unloaded enough until he finally dropped for good. Both men retired after the fight. Cummings getting a win in his hometown. The first time his daughter saw him fight. Feel good moment. Definitely feel good moment. Herman retiring. Again, I mentioned already, longest tenured guy in the UFC's history. No one's ever had. If Guida makes it to October, and I hope he doesn't, then he'll surpass this. But at the moment, Ed Herman, longest tenured fighter in UFC history. No one's had a longer continuous run than him. I mean, for context, when he got in at the Ultimate Fighter Season 3, both Chuck Liddell and Tim Sylvia were champions. If you want to feel old, because I watched that season of The Ultimate Fighter. I watched that finale live, actually. He beat Kendall. He lost to Kendall Grove in the finals, but he had a better career than Kendall. That's a middleweight. Yeah, Michael Bisping was on that same season fighting at light heavyweight. And Bisping's been retired for, a little bit now. The fight itself was fine. Kind of one-sided. But the moment afterwards, when they both retired, Herman got super emotional. I mean, the dude's been doing this forever. I mean, his professional debut was what? 2003. So 20 years. Yeah, May 10th. So just about exactly 20 years he's been doing this. I mean, you guys may not know this or remember this, but technically speaking, Ed Herman has a win over Glover Teixeira. He beat Glover in 2005. Wild sport, man. Especially those early days. There are some weird intersections throughout the history of it. You stick around it long enough. So, yeah, they both retired. Cummings may or may not unretire. Herman, I think, is done. Between age and miles and everything, Herman's done. So, again, a fun little fight for as long as it lasted. Jillian Robertson, next up at strawweight, defeated Piero Rodriguez. Armbar, 4:21 to the second. Rodriguez didn't like the stoppage, so Robertson out-grapples Rodriguez. Whole fight. Finishes, she's got Rodriguez mounted. She goes for an armbar. And Rodriguez looks like she tries the Brazilian tap and doesn't continue to tap, but the ref kind of looks at that, and then the referee said it was a verbal submission. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the fighter says, I tap. They can't say tap. If you can't do it physically, you can do it verbally. But in MMA, a sound of pain constitutes a verbal submission. So she might have made a noise that would constitute it. Again, it's not clear on the audio that we have. I'm fine with people treating the Brazilian tap like a real tap, for the record. If you're not familiar with the Brazilian tap, people, if you're in a submission and it's a little bit tight, you can kind of, usually on the off side of the ref, you tap once, and you can then argue I wasn't tapping, I was fighting for hand position, I was trying to pummel in, and if the other guy feels a tap, he might let go. The danger is if the ref sees it, the referee might rule, no, that was a tap. They don't usually. This is one of those stupid things where someone goes like, well, that's why you have to tap 3 times. Like, that's kind of stupid. Nothing wrong. It's just weird. So I think she tried that, and I don't think it worked. I was fine with this being ruled a submission, for the record. So Robertson at strawweight. She wants to move up the ranks pretty quickly. Fair enough. Lightweight, Daniel Zellhuber defeated Lando Venata via unanimous decision. 29-27, 29-28, and 30-27. Only one 10-8 in here, a little bit surprising. I thought Zellhuber actually absolutely deserved a 10-8 in the first. He dropped Venata bad. He had a long sequence of offense. They could have stopped it. I understand why they didn't, and why the referee didn't, but they could. He could have. He absolutely could have. Yeah, I mean, Venata rebounded okay, but Zellhuber's a big guy for lightweight. He's long, he's tall. He's got some smooth, he got some very technically proficient hands. I know he had that setback in his UFC debut, but he performed quite ably here. So it was a pretty good fight. Back to strawweight, Denise Gomes defeated Bruna Brazil via TKO punches, 2:42 of the second. Brazil just, her defense not where it needed to be. She had no real feel for the distance. Anytime they traded, her head was straight up. I mean, the finishing exchange here, they both land right hands, but Gomes is kind of braced for it and behind her shoulders a little bit, and Brazil is not, and she gets cracked much worse. Bantamweights, Gaston Bolaños defeated Aaron Phillips via unanimous decision, 229-28, 130-27. Fun little fight. I don't remember too much about it, but Bolaños fought very well. No, it was Herman got deducted a point for. I forgot to mention this about Cummings and Herman. Herman figured out a flaw in the judging system, or how the referee was doing things. He landed an illegal up kick to Cummings in the first when he was on his back. So he's down, Cummings is in his guard, and he kind of kicks him in the face. And the referee warns him, give Cummings time to reset, and then they start back on the feet. He just didn't want to be on bottom anymore, so he does it again in the second. Referee takes a point, but still restarts them on the feet. I feel like there was something between Phillips and Bolaños that I just can't remember. But again, Bolaños looked pretty darn good here. And kicking everything off, Jocelyn, terrible decision. So Jocelyn Edwards misses weight and defeats Lucia Pudilova via split decision. These were 29-28s. Terrible decision. Pudilova, I thought, had the first, and she get 1 and 2, and then I think Edwards had the third. I think that's how I thought it played out. This was awful. Like, commentary buried this. I mean, you occasionally get commentary when they disagree with the decision, but they straight up buried this one. And I agree, man. Like, terrible decision. Pudilova she not only had takedowns, she had one in the first and one in the second. She didn't only get the takedown. She got very superior position. And it's not like Edwards really lit her up on the feet either. I think they got this wrong. I think Pudilova got screwed here. Bad decision. Bad decision. Nothing else to say about it. Just awful. Not a single, let me put it this way. Not a single media outlet scored this fight for Edwards. Now, I don't care all that much about, media scores and whatnot as a general rule because, one, they don't matter, but like when nobody scores it the other way and 2 of the cage side judges do, that's a problem. Like, that's a real problem. This was a bad call. Straight up. Bad call. I know that the relevant athletic commission won't do anything, but if I were Pudilova, man, I might see if there's something I can do. Like what the heck? It was that bad. All right, that was the event. 14 fights. They were kind of busting through them, man, and 14 is just too many. It's just too many. 14, 15, just too many. 12 is a pretty good number. So your bonuses, I mentioned already, fight of the night was Algeo and Brown. No argument. Performances went to Edson Barboza, Brandon Royval, and Jillian Robertson. Not going to object to fighters getting more money as a general rule, but might have gone Cummings over Robertson personally. Barboza and Royval, no issues at all. I mean, yeah, just none. Those were some clean knockouts. Yeah, that's the full event. If you want my live round-by-round scoring, which again I have somewhat disavowed here, you can find it in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com along with clips of the finishes. Pardon me. Clips of the finishes and, again, my live scoring and whatnot. Full report, MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Give it a read if you're so inclined. I always appreciate it. Alrighty, let us move on to UFC preview. UFC and ESPN Plus 80. I mentioned it already. Main event: Sergey Pavlovich and Curtis Blades. It's a pretty good fight. So I mentioned already, Pavlovich, again, stupid long reach, 84 inches. He's 6'3". He's a block of Russian power. His only loss ever was his UFC debut when he got paired up with Alistair Overeem, which is a heck of a debut. Since then, he's stopped everybody in the first round. So Marcelo Golm, Maurice Green, Shamil Abdurakhimov, Derek Lewis, and Tai Tuivasa. He's going to have his hands full here because Curtis Blades is tough and one of the most dedicated wrestlers that exists in the UFC. I mean, in fairness, Blades he's only lost to two men. Francis Ngannou twice, and then Derek Lewis. Okay, the Aspinall fight was weird. I mean, that was last year, and Aspinall blew his knee out 15 seconds into the fight. That was that weird stretch of time when it was like 3 events in a row were in very close proximity, all of which had either main events or high-profile fights that ended due to just kind of random knee injury. Because Rakic and Smith was around the same time. Not Smith, Blachowicz. Rakic and Blachowicz was around the same time. And then, in somewhat close proximity, you had Cater and Allen, which ended in the second. Logically, this is Blades. Doesn't mean I'm going to pick him, but logically it's Blades. He's proven to be a very, very tough fighter. Pretty darn durable, hard to beat. One of the best wrestlers in the division, a relentless takedown threat. Can fight for 5 rounds, not at the highest pace, but he can do it. If Pavlovich doesn't get him out of there in the first, I would pick Blades. Here's the thing. Blades is a little bit predictable going in for the takedowns, and if Pavlovich is smart, he'll time the uppercuts to that. I'm going to pick Pavlovich here. It's counter-logical. Again, logically, this is Blades. But I don't know, man. Yeah, I think it's Blades. It's close, but I think it's Blades. Not going to be surprised if Pavlovich pulls it off, but the longer this goes, the more it favors Blades as a general rule. And, that's not always the best sign. You can blitz through a lot of heavyweights, but when the first time you run into some of those people that you can't, things tend to fall apart. So going with Blades, but not a bad main event. We're not quite sure what's up at heavyweight because John Jones is the champion. John and Stipe is theoretically in the works, but it's not going to happen International Fight Week in July. John's currently saying, fighting the greatest heavyweight of all time. Stipe is not the greatest heavyweight of all time, but he's the most accomplished UFC heavyweight of all time, easily. Doing that, beating that guy in Madison Square Garden in my retirement fight, that's looking pretty good. The UFC does, they do have another event kind of scheduled for Madison Square Garden later in the year. They usually do another one around then. So that's possible, but it does leave the heavyweight division a little bit awkward. You've still got Gon, who's very good. Tuivasa still kind of hanging out there. Derek Lewis, no one quite knows what's up with Lewis. So Pavlovich and Blades are both in the conversation, but we just don't know what exactly is going on at heavyweight at the top, so who knows. Next up, bantamweight, Song Yadong and Ricky Simone. Song coming off of that loss to Corey Sandhagen where his face got carved up. His right eye was a mess by the end of that. Bad cut, eye swollen. It was a fair stoppage there. Simone, and that weird loss to Uriah Faber. Then he lost to Rob Font. The fight with Ray Borg that took place after that was, I don't recall who I scored that for. It was a split decision, and I think it was one that probably could have gone either way. But his last couple of fights, he's beaten Rafael. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. It's Borg, Gaetano Perello, Brian Kelleher, Rafael Assunção, and then Jack Shore. So he's on a pretty good run. Song's tough, though. It's hard to take him down. It's harder to hold him down. He's got power. It's a tough one. It's just a tough one. I think I am going to lean Song. Might be the last time I do this, but I think I'm going to lean Song at the moment. Song's also fought better guys. I mean, Simone, he has the Font fight, but since then, it's kind of been building back up, which is not a wrong thing to do, but it's what he's been doing. So, I'm gonna go with Song, but that's close. It's not a bad fight. Middleweight, Brad Tavares and Bruno Silva. Brad Tavares, another guy's been with the UFC for quite some time. Debuted in 10, so 13 years. Been in the UFC. Coming off that loss to Dricus du Plessis. I don't know. It kind of feels like Bruno Silva here, doesn't it? I mean, Silva had that tough fight with Alex Pereira. He lost. That might have cracked his chin a little bit. Because Mearshart after that, he kind of gave Mearshart the business early and then faded, and Mearshart cracked him and choked him. I'm going to go with Silva here, but this might be the last time might be one of the last times I pick him. If he's really in trouble, then Tavares beats him. Lightweight, this is a fun one. Bobby Green and Jared Gordon. Good old Bobby Green. Had that tough fight with Drew Dober, man. He and Dober kind of got after each other, and he just came out on the wrong end of it. Because Dober is cinder block head. Just can't hurt him. I like Gordon plenty. Yeah, he should have beat Paddy Pimblett. I mean, that fight at UFC 282, he should have won that fight. Just wasn't that hard to score, and they botched that horribly. I think I'm gonna go with Green here, though. This is just a style thing. I think Green Lee does enough stuff that might give Gordon problems. Women's strawweight, we have Yasmin Lucindo and Brogan Walker Sanchez. Walker Sanchez had that loss to Juliana Miller. Yeah, that was a rough loss. And she's losses to Pearl Gonzalez, Erin Blanchfield, and Juliana Miller. I don't know. If she can't get by Lucindo here, I think I'm still going to go with Brogan, but yeah. Welterweight, Jeremiah Wells and Matthew Semmelsberger. That's a kind of a fun fight. Wells knocked out Court McGee. He's 3-0 in the UFC on a 5-fight winning streak. Semmelsberger's been up and down in the UFC. Coming off a pretty good win, though. Just a fun little fight. I think I'll lean Semmelsberger, but how long has Wells been out? Hang on. June of 2022 when he fought Court McGee. That'd actually be Wells. I'm still going to lean Semmelsberger, but not by a lot. On the prelims, so that's our main card. Prelims, we have Ricky Glenn and Christos Giagos. It feels like a Rick Glenn pick. He's been out for a while, though. He fought Grant Dawson to a majority draw in October of 21. He's been doing since. Suffered a torn groin. He was supposed to fight Drew Dober. I hope he's better, because those can be nasty. Those can be just tough returns. Giagos, yeah. I mean, his losses in the UFC are to Charles Oliveira, Drakkar Klose, Arman Tsarukyan, and Thiago Moises, so he's not losing to bums. But I think this is a Glenn pick. Bantamweights, Ronnie Yahya and Montel Jackson. Good old Ronnie Yahya, man. Still out there getting it done. Guy gets no respect. No respect for all for Mr. Yahya. I actually think he wins this. Do I? Yeah, screw it. It's an emotional pick more than anything else, but I'm going with Yahya. Women's featherweight, Carol Hossa and Norma Dumont. Rosa got lucky on that majority decision win over Lena Landsberg. Because she had a point deducted. That could have easily been a draw. Dumont lost that fight to Macy Chasson. That was a rough one. I don't know. Flip a coin. Maybe Dumont? Yeah, sure. Pick Dumont. Heavyweights. Muhammad Usman, the brother of Kamaru, and Junior Tafa. Feels... Double check Tafa here. If that is... Okay, this is not the guy I was thinking of. I believe I was thinking of the other Tafa. Hang on. Yeah, okay. I think he's the brother of Justin Tafa. Might be wrong about that. If this was Justin Tafa, my pick might be different. As it stands, he's trying to make his UFC debut here. He's supposed to fight Waldo Cortez Acosta. I think it's Usman. I just think it's Usman. Let's see. Next up, Francis Marshall and William Gomez. Gomez is 1-0 in the UFC. He beat Jarno Aarons. Yeah, he beat Jarno Aarons. On a pretty good winning streak, actually, overall. Whereas his opponent, Francis Marshall, 7-0, 1-0 in the UFC. He beat Marcelo Rojo. Actually, I think this is Marshall. Not by a whole lot, but I think it's Marshall. Priscilla Cachoeira, still employed by the UFC for reasons that make no sense to anyone. She's won her last couple of fights. She's fighting Karine Silva. Silva, 1-0 in the UFC on a, 6-fight overall winning streak? Yeah, she beat Poliana Botelho. I don't think I pick Cachoeira to win at all at this point as like general principle. I'll go with Silva, but who knows? Bantamweights, Brady Hiestand and Dana Batgary. Hiestand is 6-2, 1-1 in the UFC. Yeah, he dropped that tough finale to Ricky Tercios and then beat Fernie Garcia. It was not a great performance from him, though. I like Batgary. He's 3-3 in the UFC. He's had some tough fights, man. He was doing well against Gutierrez before that spinning back fist. The Kyung Ho Kang fight was pretty competitive. Oh, yeah, I think I'm gonna pick Bakary, but it might be a bit more sentimental in terms of picks than I should be going, and I should know better. Yeah, that's the card. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 fights. Yeah. I will be covering it, of course, Friday or Saturday in the MMA Zone at 411mania.com. So if you're interested, stop by, say hello. Always appreciate it. All right, let's move on to the news. So it's been made official by DAZN Boxing. Jake Paul will box Nate Diaz. I don't really care. Look, Paul's the bigger man physically. Paul's the harder puncher. Diaz's volume might trouble him. We saw this a little bit in the fight between Paul and Tommy Fury. Most of the guys that Paul has fought to this point were content to let him set up a little bit. Fury didn't. Fury kind of just worked enough combinations, stopped letting him set up at a slower pace. Never let him get really comfortable. So Diaz might be able to do something similar, but Diaz's face is also like 80% scar tissue at this point. So who knows? In general, my patience with this kind of freak show boxing is worn really thin lately, and that's not just Jake Paul. It's kind of a general thing. I mean, there was what was it that YouTube did, or the Creator Clash, which at least was for charity. Man, that rubbed me the wrong way this time around, and I figured out why. So, clips and talking points were floating around Twitter, and some people in my other social circles, such that they exist, cared about this because of some of the people involved. And so I got a few bit of, I ran into this more than once. I didn't really have time to watch it live. When's it going to show up? Where's it going to show up? I want to watch X. And in response to one of these, both my patience didn't fully snap, but I said, I'm sure this will wind up on YouTube in the next week or so. I mean, legally, even. Like, it'll just be on YouTube. But if you're curious, low-level boxing all kind of looks the same, which is true. And it got me into a little bit of a back and forth with this guy. And I had to stop myself at one point. Like, I guess one of his responses was, uh, he kind of explained, I don't think English is this guy's first language, so being charitable, like something gets lost a little bit in translation here. He said, I wanted to watch this fight, and I almost said something that would not have been helpful, but I stopped myself and had to go like, okay, why is this bothering you, right? Like this is because normally, I'm a very even-keeled guy. So why is this innocuous guy on the internet who's just asking for kind of baseline information? What's pinging here? And I figured it out. So let me tell you why my patience with this is worn very, very thin. It's not I don't object to people who are independently wealthy trying this out. I'm not one of these like no fighting. I don't buy into the honor BS about this, about fighting for money. One of the reasons I don't begrudge Jake Paul doing it. Like, you want to go out there, you want to put in the effort, you want to fight, fine, go ahead, knock yourself out or get knocked out, as the case may be. But whatever. Um, and I've been fortunate enough to avoid the Jake Paul fans. I think by and large, otherwise my patience with this might have eroded a lot faster. But the number of people who do they don't actually care about the fights. They don't care about the technique. And again, for the Creator Clash people, like, this was for charity. So this isn't, the wealthy trying to get wealthier. But and my gripe's not even with the people who got in the ring and fought. Like, good, fair enough, man. There were a bunch of people I didn't know. There were some people I did know who were on this thing. I mean, the professional wrestler Johnny wherever, better known as like John Morrison in WWE, but he was Johnny Nitro for a while. Then on the independent scene, he's Johnny wherever. So he's Johnny Impact, he's Johnny Fusion, he's Johnny Elite, he's Johnny whatever. Johnny Bloodsport, again, whatever. He had a fight and he knocked somebody out, so, good for him. It's just, and again, this is all done for charity, which is why I don't begrudge, and I don't begrudge anyone who says, you know what, I want to try boxing. Okay, cool. Go ahead. And doing a celebrity charity boxing event like this shouldn't bother me. And I realize it's not the fighters. It's not the people going and doing this. It's more the subset of their fan bases that get online. That's what annoys me. Because these are the people who will do the, I just want to see so-and-so do the thing, because, boy, they sure put in effort. Like, one, you don't know that. You know a facsimile of what's going on, filtered through a dozen lenses, not the least of which is what they want you to see, followed closely by your personal bias for and or against, depending on, again, who we're talking about. And it annoyed me because, and again, it took me a minute to sort this thing out. It annoyed me because I know of way too many fighters who put in a lot more work over a lot longer period of time than these people who are doing this for, again, I'm not saying there's no personal stakes in it or that they didn't train hard, but these are independently wealthy people who are used to being professionally charming, exploiting that. I mean, exploiting, again, this is charity, but I know way too many people working way too hard at this who are ignored, demeaned, belittled, because they're not independently a celebrity. And encountering that subset of the fans of some of these people, it really did kind of, between that and like and stuff about just the knowledge about how put upon fighters are, especially MMA fighters. I think I know this is boxing, but it's all kind of wrapped together here. Like, it really wound up rubbing me the wrong way, and a lot of my patience for this entire circus is real thin these days. Which is a long way of me saying, if I happen to snap at anybody over this, I apologize in advance. It's not really about you necessarily. And just a lot of the fans coming out and just, I know that my favorite person who I've never actually met and will never meet in any meaningful capacity just tried so hard, and maybe they did. But my personal level of interest in your simpery over independently wealthy people finding good locations that other fighters would kill to get into, training for 8 weeks, and then going on to perform amateur boxing, which is what, I mean, these might have been professional fights, but this is amateur level boxing, for even for charity, but like on a stage that is utterly unearned within the meritocracy of the activity you're performing. It annoys me. And I try really hard not to take it out on people. Once I figured out what was going on within me, I was like, okay, stop. You can say something helpful. You can not. I don't need to be a jerk. I don't need to make this worse. I don't need to escalate this. And also in knowing, like, okay, this is the natural endpoint of various interactions. Like, just there's no point in continuing. It's not fruitful. So the Jake Paul and Diaz thing, again, I give Paul a little bit of a pass relative to. I mean, I know he's getting paid, but my thing with Jake Paul this entire time has been I know he takes his training seriously and he takes these activities seriously. And I'm not saying anyone at the Creator Clash didn't. You know, it's just that kind of just the entire result of that activity, some of those personalities, and the subset of their fan bases that become vocal about it. Like it's not a good mix. So, but Diaz and Paul, I'm sure will do fine. I don't know who wins. My hunch is Jake. My hunch, but he's got us. There are some aspects to his game that were exposed by Tommy Fury that he needs to fix before this fight, or Diaz can exploit similar holes. All right, let's do the rest of this. We got a couple other things here, but it shouldn't take too much longer. So TJ Dillashaw, the former bantamweight champion, announced his retirement via Instagram. Um, Apparently his shoulder is just too messed up, um, which a lot of us said. I mean, I remember my reaction. You can go back and listen to the show if you're so inclined. The fallout of his title fight with Aljamain Sterling, which was double check the event. So if you're interested in listening to that, you can listen to my review of UFC 280. Um, he said his shoulder had been falling out since like April, right? Hey, when was that? It was October of last year. So he said, I think it was like April, he said, that his shoulder first started falling out. So your shoulder is just turning to gravel over the course of, half a year. Yeah, he had surgery to fix it, and apparently it didn't take. I mean, dude, you were never going to get that fixed with one surgery if it was as bad as you said it was. If that shoulder had been falling out as often as he said it had, and there's enough people saying basically the same thing, I believe it, and it was doing it over that long a period of time, one surgery was never going to be enough. Even if that first surgery went great, they were never going to fix that in one. So apparently, again, according to his Instagram, that first surgery wasn't even all that successful. They're going back in at his age. He kind of tried to walk it back after and said, man, I feel like I'm too good to hang him up forever. I appreciate the competitive fire. I'm not a fan of TJ Dillashaw, but, I appreciate the competitiveness. Here's the reality, though, dude. You are 37. You're 37 in a in a division that hates anyone over the age of 35, especially at the title level. And you just probably irrevocably damaged your shoulder over the course of the year 2022 in ways that will impact you for the rest of your life, which is probably going to be 40 some odd years. I respect that you may not have wanted to go out that way. You might have to process the fact that you didn't feel you were done, but you're done. Like, you're that arm is just never going to be right ever. So, he's the second best bantamweight ever in all probability. Um, but yeah, I said it at the time, man. I think he's probably done. At his age, with that injury and the recovery and no, I just think you're done, man. Lastly, I can talk briefly about this. So, Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira had to be withdrawn from the event it was set for. Looks to be there was a minor injury to Oliveira. Looks like they're rebooking it for UFC 289. Kind of hoped they would just bump Dariush into a title fight, but I don't know what Islam Makhachev's schedule is right now anyway. But I mean, I don't hate them rebooking it. 289's not. What's the event they've got coming up that's suddenly looking real bad? Hang on. 288 actually. 288 is not a strong card. You have a good main event, Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo, but you don't have anything else. Um, what else are we looking at for the main card? I mean, we were supposed to get this. This was what Oliveira and Dariush was supposed to be on, which was a worthy co-main event. With it gone, um, the co-main event is now what? Jessica Andrade and Yan Xiaonan. Maybe Bryce Mitchell and Movsar Evloev. I mean, that's a fine fight. But they're going to have to shuffle this around. At the moment, there's only 3 fights on the main card. Sterling and Cejudo, Yan and Andrade, and then Kron Gracie and Charles Jourdain. You don't even have a lot of, like, if anything happens to Sterling and Cejudo, you're SOL, man. There's nothing else on this card worth paying for. That is not a strong pay-per-view. 289, again, if they're rebooking Dariush, I mean, that's headlined by Nunes and Pena 3, which nobody cares about. That's not an especially strong card either. What else do we have? Stephen Thompson, Michelle Pereira. Fine. Jeez. That card badly needs some help. I mean, Oliveira and Dariush will help a lot. That's a very good fight. But the other stuff on this card is like Miranda Maverick and Jasmine Jastovicius, Eric Anders, Marc-Andre Barrio, Deanna Belbicha, Maria Oliveira, Kyle Nelson and Blake Builder, Matt Schnell, David Dvorak, Dan Ige and Nate Landwehr is fine. Hakeem Dawodu and Lucas Almeida, who cares? Eamon Zahabi and Orichi Long. That's just a weak card. Sorry. I mean, we might get some good action out of it, but that's not a very compelling card. So both the next pay-per-views, not exactly tickling the old fancy, eh? All right, that's all I've got written down here. So let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy in the MMA sphere is broken since I've been doing this, and if not, we will do plugs and get out of here. All right, nope, nothing new. So if you're interested in stuff I do outside of the combat sports world, I am part of Damn You Hollywood. I am nominally the host. This last week we reviewed the Super Mario Brothers movie, biggest movie of the year thus far, by a wide margin. It is going to leave Ant-Man pretty firmly in the dust, and I'm going to laugh at it. I laugh at Ant-Man for a lot of reasons. But that's doing well, so you can find the review for that over on the W2M Network feed. You can type Damn You Hollywood into your podcast platform of choice, and you should be able to find it. This week, myself, Mark Radulich, Alexis Haina, and I believe Dorian Price will be reviewing Renfield. Jason Teasley as well, so 5 people. So, yeah, the 5 of us will get together. We will review Renfield, which sadly did not have a great opening. That's the Nick Cage / Nicholas Hoult / Aquafina movie. Sorry. Aquafina is a funny comedian. She has not yet proven to be a funny actress. All I'm saying. We'll be reviewing that on Tuesday. So Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, if you're so inclined. Give that a listen. We'll be talking in Renfield. Week after that will be Evil Dead Rise. I bullied Mark into a horror movie. I feel good about that. Well, a gory horror movie. Like Renfield, I'm sure, is technically horror. Anywho, that's where you can find me doing other podcasting stuff. As for my more regular gigs, I cover mixed martial arts and professional wrestling for 411mania.com, AEW's Dark Elevation on Mondays, WWE SmackDown on Fridays, and the UFC event on Saturday. So stop by for any and all of those in the relevant zones at 411mania.com if you're interested in my thoughts on professional wrestling and mixed martial arts action. We will be back here next week. We will review UFC on ESPN Plus 80 and preview UFC on ESPN Plus 81, which currently does not have a main event. It was supposed to be main evented by a great fight between Hanato Moicano and Arman Tsarukyan. Moicano got injured, pulled out. We don't know if someone's replacing him or not. What does that card look like? Yeah, it ain't great. Um, yeah, not great. So I don't know what they're gonna do. I don't know what they're gonna do for that one, but next week we will know more. So we'll be back here next week to talk through all of that. All right, that's it for me. Thank you all very, very much as always for listening. I deeply appreciate all of you. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.